Hello, this is Joseph Matera. I'm so excited to talk to you again today. I want to discuss the article that's coming out tomorrow in josephmatera.org. That's josephmatera.org. I'm dealing with the 7 generational challenges of Christianity. It's an in depth analysis, and I want to talk about why it's so hard for second and third generation offspring of Christians to continue on in the faith with the same zeal and fire their parents had. Even in historical narratives, be it in the Bible or in church history, we seldom read about the offspring of significant figures such as the original 12 apostles and great revivalists like John Wesley, George Whitefield, Charles Finney, and others, Spurgeon. We very rarely read about what they have done in terms of following in their parents' footsteps. Not that it's impossible and not that we don't see a lot of those incredible examples, but when we don't see them, I want to discover why. And that's the particular emphasis today of my article and this video podcast. And so, Peter, the Apostle Peter, of course, he was married, yet we find no record of his children in church history carrying forward his traditions. I'm not saying they didn't, but evidently they must not have made a major impact the way Peter did. And we also see many other examples, as I mentioned. And so I want to get into 7 reasons why this may be the case. And my point today is so that we can uh, make amends and adjust our approach to our children and have honest dialogue with them so that they're aware of this propensity. So, number one, a challenge for generational Christianity is a lack of a powerful testimony. Many times the parents have been saved dramatically. Maybe they reach rock bottom. Whatever the reason is, they had a date and a time when they were converted. Oftentimes, when they raise their children are so aware of the presence of God that children have no great presence, or rather, a testimony. And some of them don't even have a testimony because they don't even know when they were lost and when they were saved because they were so used to being brought up in the faith and they always thought they had Christ and walked with Christ. And I've even had one of my own children who had no particular time when he gave his life to Christ, but yet he's walking with Jesus. And so a lack of a powerful testimony is good because I'm glad our children didn't have to go through the same things we went through. I'm glad they didn't have to deal with substance abuse and illicit affairs or crazy, situations in their family that we read about all the time. But the fact that they don't have a powerful testimony because they were raised in a Christian environment means that their journey is more of a steady continuum of faith, but may lack the intensity of a profound conversion narrative that they could look back upon. So this could be a challenge to them. It doesn't have to be. And again, I'm glad that my children weren't brought up in a crazy environment. And I'm glad when children in general don't have to have a powerful conversion experience because they were raised in the Lord. Now, some of my children have had powerful conversion experiences in terms of they know, because to me, every conversion is a powerful experience, even if it's not overly dramatic. But they did know when they gave their life to Christ. Some of my children don't, and some do. But the point is, this could be a challenge when children are just raised in the faith and they don't have to deal with the same things the parents did. Number two, sometimes our children, the children that are second and third generation and on, take their faith for granted. Children of Christian parents often take the things of God and the church for granted because they've never known anything else. It's like a fish doesn't know what it's like to be out of water. They were always around the presence of God, the way a fish is always in water. They're always in a particular Christian atmosphere. They were always immersed in the faith since birth. They were immersed in the teachings and Christian and practices of Christianity. But sometimes because of that, it could become routine and it could lose its profoundness in the minds and hearts of second and third generation children. This lack of realization of the magnitude of their faith can lead to a superficial relationship with God. Here's another challenge, a third challenge. They're unprepared for the secular world. I know when our kids are small, we are called to protect and prepare them. But once they hit teenage years, especially 14, 15 years old when they go to high school, you can't protect them anymore. You just could trust in what you've prepared them to be in their formative years. They'll be ready to meet the world. But some Christian parents go overboard in trying to protect their kids and they insulate them and they put them in a bubble their whole life. And then when they hit high school or college, they're not ready for the challenges of the secular world. And so some Christian parents, for example, opt to shield their children entirely from worldly influences through homeschooling them up until the end of high school. And while this may be great in terms of grades and in terms of protecting them, if they don't integrate them socially with other homeschoolers or in other ways of socialization that's available in their community, and if they don't adequately prepare them with a biblical worldview, these kids are not going to be prepared for what they are surrounded with in college or in the real world. A fourth challenge is many of the Christians have no need for sacrifice in the second and third generation. Children don't have to pay the price a lot of times in fasting and prayer to establish their lives after their parents have already done so. This can create a disconnect from the hardships their parents had to endure, reducing their appreciation of their parents' faith sacrifices. And so, a lot of times in beginning stages of a church plant or something like that, myself and my wife, for example, we had no money. We had very few people helping us. We had my parents and one other couple in the very, very beginning of our ministry before we started the church. And even when we started the church, we had no church planning team or money that was coming in. And we had to fast and pray. We had to constantly evangelize, and we weren't sure how we were going to make it. It was so hard that first two children that were born in Medicaid, I guess it would be. And then we had to get help from the state, and I had to opt out of Social Security because we couldn't even afford to have that money taken out of my salary every week. And it was very, very hard, but we saw God move mightily. God came through, and eventually we were blessed financially. But my children, thankfully, never had to endure that kind of sacrifice. But that could also have a negative effect if they haven't established the disciplines of fasting and prayer. And I'm not even talking about my children, I'm just talking in general children, because, at least I know that some of my children are fasting and praying regularly. It's not that they don't have any problems. Every child is going to have problems, even if they're raised in the faith, as we know. But they had no idea, children of the second and third generation, especially those who planted churches or who were pioneers in the faith, have no idea of what it took sacrificially for that work to be established. And sometimes they can take it for granted. And that leads to the fifth challenge. Prosperity that comes from walking with God can also lead to a lack of faith in the second and third generation, because what we had to believe God for as parents resulted in abundance, which was handed on to our children, and it may diminish their need for faith as their life circumstances do not require the same reliance on God that their parents experienced. Of course, I believe that anybody who's really going after God is going to receive a vision from God that's going to be greater than their natural capacity and their natural resources can afford. Otherwise, it's not God. You don't need God to do something you can do in the natural. But being that it's it's second, third generation, and there's usually some more prosperity and more um, affluence because of the blessing of God. A lot of times our children don't know what it takes to have to believe God for their daily bread, and that could be uh, something that could be a challenge for them. Number six, sometimes second, third generation children replicate the negative traits of their parents who are in the faith, negative traits that were never fully dealt with. You know, life is a journey. We're always in a process, even though our spirit is saved instantly. Our mind and our emotions are renewed day by day, and we mature. We matriculate in the faith. And sometimes we're not fully dealt with in every area of life, and our children replicate the wrong attributes that we have. And that brings shame to the name of Christ in some instances. Number seven, sometimes our children resent our sacrifices. Sometimes the pioneers didn't spend enough time with their children. Sometimes the price was so great that the children resent God and the church. That's why a lot of PKs don't serve the Lord, because their parents had an idea of the kingdom that I believe wasn't biblical. Was they separated God's work from the family, and they thought that God's work was more important than the family, or sometimes just the general need of getting a work started is so great, so severe, and sometimes even the challenges they have in starting a church with attacks from other people and people being flaky or disloyal or betraying their parents sometimes causes children to resent the faith. However, as I conclude, despite these challenges, I still believe very strongly that God says that He wants a blessing for 1,000 generations. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, a godly inheritance that we should never, ever take for granted. This is Joseph Matera. I hope you were blessed by this broadcast. Remember to read the article that comes out tomorrow on this topic.